Hey guys, I want to talk about kind of the right pots for the right seeds this month with my guide. It's a really important topic because I feel like if we don't set our seeds up for the right space from the get-go, we can have problems. You could be overwatering things really easily if the pot's too big. You can be stressing the roots out if the pot's too small. If you don't pot up at the right time, you can run into trouble. If plants are sensitive, if they have got really sensitive roots, you want to choose the right size pot to make sure that those roots don't get root bound. All right, so starting with things that take the longest. Onions. Onions are my rule breaker. They are the only vegetable that I allow to get pot bound. They're not pot bound right now, but I guarantee by the last week in April, when I usually plant them out, this thing is gonna be full of roots. Not only full of roots, it's gonna be a mess. Onions have proven to me that they're okay being pot bound like this. There are no other vegetables I would do this to. So you can start onions in a larger pot. I don't recommend starting plants in pots this big. You can do it with onions, and you can leave them in it. They don't need to be potted up, even though they're gonna be inside for 8 weeks. Another thing I would never do with any other vegetable. Okay, onions are weird. What can I say? Other things that you start early. Basically, the rule is the earlier you start things, the more likely they are to need to be potted up. So I have got peppers here and eggplants here and artichokes in this tray that didn't really germinate very well. And kind of want to get in here and see how some of these plants look. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, this is like one of my favorite things to do is to kind of look at the roots. So here's one of my eggplants and you can see those roots are hitting the end of the soil block there. These need to get potted up, all right? So I've got options for potting up. There's no way this plant is gonna do well. It's gonna stunt if it stays in this. It's not gonna get much bigger than this if I don't pot it up. It's got another like 8 weeks inside probably. I can put it into this if I want, newspaper pot. I'm not gonna do a newspaper pot. I don't use newspaper pots for everything, okay? I'm probably gonna put it into a plastic pot. Dries out better. And I do my peppers in plastic pots now when I pot them up and not newspaper because I found that the newspaper pots don't work well for peppers. Peppers like it a little drier soil. So I'm not gonna drop this all the way down, but you can see that that has quite a bit of space in there. So that will be what these will go up into and they'll stay in there until they go out, okay? So peppers are gonna need to be potted up. Tomatoes, once you start tomatoes, I'm gonna get them potted up as well. They're gonna get potted up though, probably into a 3.5 inch pot. And then from there, I'm gonna go into a gallon pot. It usually happens. I almost can guarantee it's gonna happen. But that's kind of my trajectory for my tomatoes because I start them about 8 weeks early. They get twice potted up. So they get potted up about every 4 weeks. So germination to 4 weeks. So for the tomatoes, it might be 3 or 4 weeks because some of them are looking like they could be happier in a bigger pot. And then again, another 3 or 4 weeks. Where are we at? Yeah, so middle of April, some of my tomatoes might need to get potted up again because they're gonna need another 3 weeks inside. Okay, so that's kind of like the bulk of what I do when I pot up. Almost everything else, I guess I should mention, celery too gets potted up. I pot up my celery into 2-inch soil blocks. This only needs to happen in the winter. It doesn't need to happen in the spring because in the spring I can go straight from a 2-inch soil block of celery, harden it off and get it into the garden because the soil's not under 5 feet of snow. Almost everything else just goes straight from a pot into the garden. And there's options for pots if you're only going from the pot into the garden, okay? You all know that I love my 2-inch soil blocker. There's also smaller soil block sizes. I don't really use this much for vegetables. I might try it with beets and lettuce, although that is like an insane amount of beets and lettuce. One tray would make like 72 or 75 individual pots. That's a lot of lettuce. We're not a lettuce farm, so I'm not sure I'm gonna do that. I might stick with these larger pot sizes. So 2-inch soil blocks is kind of my go-to for almost everything. It's for flowers that need an extra start. So I'm starting to do some flowers pretty soon here, and I'll share that with you. Okay, so other vegetables that I leave just in my 2-inch soil blocks are anything that's just gonna be indoors for about 4 weeks, all right? So that's like all of my brassicas. You look at my sowing charts, I've got like a ton of brassicas listed. I'm talking broccoli, I'm talking cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, all my cabbages, my bok choy, my kohlrabi, any other things in that category. Let's say my beets, my lettuce, any other things that you'd see on my sowing charts. Those all usually are only inside. They germinate, get some true leaves put on. This tray needs to be thinned out actually, and then I start hardening them off, and then they end up outside. So they shouldn't be more than 5 weeks from when you seed them to when they go out to the garden. Staying in a 2-inch soil block is great, okay? However, you don't need a soil blocker. Here I'm talking about soil blocker, not necessary. This is what we used to do all of our seed starting in. This is a 2-inch, well, it's more like a 1.5, but this is a half of a 72 plug tray. It's a 6x6. We used to go from this is where we sowed all of our peppers and tomatoes, and we would just go right into a yogurt container. We'd poke some holes in the bottom, we'd throw some glue tape on there, label them, call it a day, okay? We literally only grew about like 5 or 6 tomatoes for the longest time. Not huge tomato people. I mean, it's debatable if we still are. So anyway, your seed starting system could be as simple as this. This was our seed starting system when we were in the city. It works for everything. Same rules apply. Longer things are indoors. They need to be potted up. I would still start my onions this way even when we did this system. But I didn't grow like celery back then. I didn't grow nearly as many brassicas. We didn't have as much space. But I also started all my flowers in these too. These work great for starting flowers as well. All right. The 1.5-inch soil block is kind of the equivalent of that pot size. So there are some vegetables though that I start indoors that I don't use a soil block for, that I use a larger pot for. I use this pot, okay? And that is all of my cucurbits, okay? They're larger seeded. So really, first of all, getting the seed in there without breaking the soil block is like not gonna happen. That's part one. And I always felt like if you needed to bury the seed, like a 1/2 inch or more, at that point, I feel like I'm like all the way down. Anyway, I just didn't think that these 2-inch soil blocks made sense for the larger seeded things. So my peanuts, my summer squash, my winter squash, my cucumbers, my cantaloupes, and my watermelons, and my sunflowers, because they're also root sensitive, all get put into these pots. All right? They are very fast to germinate. They're very fast to establish because they've got a really big seed, so they've got really big cotyledons. When it comes time to transplanting, people always ask me, can you put this in the ground? And the answer is yes. However, here's what I like to do, is when I go to pot them, I will very carefully rip them open, and then I have the whole root ball right there. And then I'll take it and I'll dump it. I'll have the hole already ready with fertilizer, and I'll just very carefully move it. This is the best way to not disturb the roots, okay? So cucumber roots do not like to be disturbed. Yes, you can direct seed them. For me, I get a jump on my harvest season, especially things like my summer squash and my cucumbers, by starting them indoors in the middle of May and transplanting them out about 3 weeks later. So more about that in the spring. All right, so that's the bulk of the vegetables. Now let's talk about flowers. So for flowers, this is great, like I mentioned, 72 plug tray. That would work great for flowers. 2-inch soil blocks is what I use for anything flower-wise that I sow early, all right? I also forgot to mention, I use these 2-inch soil blocks for herbs. So my basil, my lemongrass, and my cumin are coming up right now. So is my marjoram and my thyme, and I started some cilantro that we plan on eating indoors. So this works great for those too. But for flowers, I will use my 2-inch soil block for things I need to start early, all right? So that includes my Mexican torch sunflower. That is the one flower that I will pot up inside because it gets like massive leaves. Tithonia, it's a fabulous pollinator-friendly plant. It's a cousin of the zinnia. It's native to Mexico, Central America. It gets really big. Like it can get to be like 5 feet by 5 feet. Like, so plant accordingly if you want to grow it. It's really fun. What else do I start? So gomphrena, so globe amaranth, straw flower, I start early. So I usually do a whole flat of gomphrena, so 50 plugs, because I really love it as a border in the garden. Straw flower, I might do part of a tray, so it usually ends up in a tray with something else. Straw flower needs light to germinate, so this is where it gets kind of tricky, and I'm going into the weeds a little bit. So I might mix it with like some snapdragons if I want to start those from seed. However, I only like my snapdragons if I know exactly what color they're going to be, because I'm type A and I don't have any of those right now, so I don't think I'm actually going to do snapdragons inside. I have some that self-seed right now, and I'm kind of fine with that. So the rest of my flowers. So some flowers will do 2-inch pots. My point about all of those is that anything that needs to be inside for more than 4 weeks, flower-wise, should be in a 2-inch soil block, okay? And I'm not potting them up. I'm just gonna give them lots of fertilizer. All my other flowers, I transplant into these. And this is a really, really small tray. This is a 128 plug tray. This is kind of like just a starter tray. I'm pretty sure that the way farmers use this, I think a lot of them do use these, is that you just get stuff started, just like first leaves like this, like tiny little things, and you pop them out and you transplant them, you pot them up, or you get them hardened off and into the garden. I leave a lot of my flowers in these. So I'll do one whole flat of these as just zinnia, and I'll do another one that's mixed, that's like marigolds, cosmos, sweet alyssum, okay? Oh, calendula I'll also do in these 2-inch pots, I forgot, as well as nasturtium. I do like a whole flat of nasturtium in these. So I feel like, again, larger seeds, right? Nasturtium seeds are a little bigger. I don't do them in here. It just doesn't seem like it's a good idea. Not enough space. So these are basically putting my plants under a lot of duress because the plants outgrow these, but it's flowers. And so kind of like with my onions, I've done it enough to know it works. I don't really recommend these though. If you're gonna have plastic trays, I would go for the 72 plug tray and not that larger tray. The reason I did it was I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I could grow like twice as many flowers under the same light. And yes, it's true, but I also have a little bit of attrition. I have death because I end up underwatering things and they desiccate really quickly. And so it's not a perfect system. When that system runs out, like when those trays really start getting to the point where I can't use them, I've used them for about 6 years now, I'm gonna switch to the 1.5-inch soil block. It's only gonna be half the capacity, but it's gonna be more root space, and so the plants will be happier. So yeah, so I hope this just shows you that like there's no one way to start seeds. There's no one system that's just right. While I do love my soil blocks, you can see I still do have quite a bit of plastic in our seed starting system, and that's totally okay. It's okay for me. Is it okay for you? I guess that's your choice. But all is to say, there's not just like one method. I mean, there can be one method, and like I said, one method, the simplest method would be either like a 72 plug tray or just a 2-inch soil block, something like that. The consistency of the soil needs to be slightly different. The soil blocks need to be wetter to make than it is when you go to seed in just regular pots like that. So actually, it sort of saves time to not soil block in that regard, which is just something to consider if you're considering soil blocking. And then the longer you have things indoors, the more space you're gonna need for them. So you really have to ask yourself, how much space do you realistically have? We have 11 lights, you guys, and we still run out of space. We run out of space because our tomatoes get too tall to fit under our grow lights. It's a legitimate problem that happens every year. And I keep trying to start my tomatoes as late as possible, and we'll see if it happens this year. I bury them deep every time I transplant them, but they still get too tall for our lights, and then they end up in a windowsill, and it's not ideal. But just know that like there's lots of options out there, and that, you know, a soil block isn't for everyone, and I fully respect that. Newspaper pots are not for every type of plant, like I mentioned, so really keep that in mind. And if you're gonna invest in plastic, invest in like really sturdy plastic. Like these were just a really, really burly plastic, burlier than these guys that I got at our local Midwest supply here in the Twin Cities last year. All right, so I hope you found this helpful. Just remember that the earlier you start seeds, you either need to get them into the ground sooner, like brassicas, so you don't have to pot them up, or you need to pot them up and give them more time and make sure you give them the right sized pot for the amount of time they're gonna be inside. If they're gonna be inside for an extra long time, you might have to do two pots up, like we have to do for our tomatoes.